first question is just sort of for the record. When and where were you born?
Old Los Angeles, 1922, September 15th. And my mother was 19 when I was born, and she was a pianist. And my grandmother, since my mother was pregnant, my grandmother just said, Jesus, I can't work, I'm too old. The grandmother was like 50, you know, and that's pretty old
in those days.
And so she got a job in this music store, and she was 17, went on 18, and before a year was up, she came home to tell her mother, my grandmother, terrible, anti-Jewish, anti-everything Italian woman, oh gosh. And not my mother. My mother was 19. To say, this man, he wants to get married and he wants to marry me, and he's a lovely man, and blah, 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 blah. And even though her mother didn't agree with her, it sounded like some money was coming in. They could move into a little nicer house, you know, because they were living in some, God knows where they were, in downtown Los Angeles. I've driven by the address, I got it written down someplace. The houses looked like they were this big. And she had the baby, she was still 19 when I was born. And when she died, I was 19. The cancer, I mean, they didn't know what the hell to do, you know, oh boy. If they could catch sometimes a couple of bulbs here and there, but they didn't have that kind of operating material. They didn't have the indoor cameras and, you know, all of that stuff. We had to cut them open to do anything with people, you know. And we put my mother open, and the doctor said, we was talking to the other doctors, and the other doctor said, well, what the hell, we're not going to do anything, because we can't do anything. We'll sew her back up. That's all. So in those days, they sewed her back up. And she lived about, not a year, about another 6-7 months. And my grandmother was raising me, and, oh God. And my mother's sister was young, of course.
This was all when you were now 19 when she passed away.
Yeah.
How about before that? And I know there's this is a bigger subject than maybe we can fully get into, but was your father present during your childhood?
I have no memory of him, other than my grandmother told me, because my mother was off working all the time. Because her brother was young. Her brother was only if I was 19, her brother was like 28 or 27 or something like that. And her sisters were only a year or two older than her, 2 sisters. And it was a case of she had to work someplace to feed all these people and me and herself. And he turned out to be, my grandmother told me, and finally my mother, once I got a little older, she told me, he was a terrible drunk all the time at the house, and he couldn't get fired at the working because he was very successful. He owned the little music shop, and that was money that helped everybody eat and so forth. But he didn't offer to get the family a more convenient, nicer house or a little nicer neighborhood to live in. But he left some money when she died, and I forget how things started, but I was a kid, and my mother knew people in show business, actors and directors and so forth, through the music store. And so talk and this and that, and one of her sisters married a director, and Norman Torog was his name, and Paramount had just negotiated him, and then Paramount negotiated with Percy Crosby, who created Skippy in the paper, and they didn't want to spend a lot of money on it because nobody had ever made a movie about somebody in the funny papers, you know. So they talked Torog into doing it, and he thought it was a good idea, and he talked them into using me. Well, I'd never acted in anything, but he could yell at me and I'd cry like that, you know. Wham!
May I just interrupt for 1 second, because I want to ask you, I understand that even before Skippy, when you were even younger, maybe by a year or two, the first 2 things that you're credited with as having done were Fox Movie Tone Follies of 1929 and Sunny Side Up, also 1929. My understanding was that your grandmother would sometimes take you down to the studio gate. Is that true?
Yeah. It was they were just bits where they wanted to use a kid in them. And Norman Torog was directing one of those. I can't remember which one. And the studio, I forget the head of Fox at that time, was very satisfied with me. So that got L.B. Mayer to looking at it. Who is this kid, you know, at MGM? And within a very short time after that, L.B. Mayer talked an agent my mother had been fortunately talked into, representing me. He talked to Mayer. Mayer talked him into bringing me in there, you know, for a test and stuff. And they did a screen test, and Mayer liked it very much. And boom, boom, that was the thing. And Hal Roach, on account of the Little Rascals and that stuff, he wanted to raise my salary and keep me there. And Mayer had his battle with him, I heard, and all that stuff. But he won it. And with money, Mayer had to give Roach some money because I still had like a year, I don't know, half a year or something to go on my contract. And I was old then. Now, what was I, 8 or 9 or 10?
Well, my question actually is, I understand before you were, first of all, there was the R Gang two-reelers. How did you, those were prior to Skippy. Prior to that was prior to, Skippy was Paramount, right? So that was prior to even Paramount.
Yes.
How did you...
The R Gang?
Yeah, how did you come to be involved in that?
In R Gang comedy, what's that? Because it was silent when it started.
Yeah.
And God, I can't remember.
Well, what I had read, I don't know if this is accurate, but was that the director of those 2 movies from 1929, David Butler, had recommended you to Leo McCarey, who arranged an audition. Is that right for our gang?
For our gang, yeah, that's it. And I had to do a test. I remember being told that. I didn't know what I was doing or why.
Right.
But that later in the years and stuff, before she died, my mother told me that was one of the things.
And you were in 15 of those R Gang movies.
I forget how many, but yeah.
Well, what I remember,
they made a lot of them.
I reviewed a little bit of them, and I know that the most memorable sort of aspect with your character was that you had a crush on your teacher, right?
Yeah, the blonde lady.
Miss Crabtree.
Yeah, right.
So even at that early age, particularly at that early age, were you acting because you wanted to, or because someone was saying you should?
No, I was convinced by my mother that she knew it was hard work. Sometimes could be fun, you know, and I'd say, oh yeah, and she'd say, I know, but it's work. It involves those things. You can't. Not everybody loves you because you're doing better than they are, and things like that. And she was never had a bad word about anybody, and she wanted me to grow up with the same feeling, you know, and understanding of people, and don't get mad at them and treat them badly because they're so jealous of you doing good, you know, doing well. And so since I was earning a living then with steadily with Hal Roach and our gang, that my mother had time off to teach me, you know, about getting along with people and things like that. And the kids would, sound was coming in, and the directors were used to telling the kids, now when you're playing the scene with him, don't look at me, but when you hear me say, you know, just wave your hand at him like you don't want to talk to him anymore and get up and walk out. He says, when you hear me say that, do it, but don't look at me, the director would say. And the kids all learned that to her. Now when the sound came in, the directors couldn't get it in his head that you got to do it in a dry rehearsal, silent rehearsal. But when the film was going, you couldn't do it, and there was a real mess.
So how did you, at such a young age, learn to do it without that?
My mother, because I would listen to her. She was no problem at all.
But even in terms of learning lines, that's not easy for an adult. How did you learn your lines?
She helped me with the lines. She would read whatever to me, read the other guy's parts and read mine too, and teach me which was my lines and that stuff. Oh yeah. And
were directors, well, we can talk in a moment about specific roles, but in general, were directors important in the process? How would they help you on the set to develop a performance? Would they explain things to you? This is what's happening in this scene. This is
somewhat. It was a lot with kids in our gang, especially that, you know, at the age of 7 and 8, 9 or 6, depending on who it was, and black or white, you know, and everything. The directors, they would talk to the kids that understood, you know, and my mother would talk to the director well ahead of my even knowing it, you know, and the director was thrilled to death because she wasn't directly trying to direct the show, but explained to him the problems that he's going to have or is having, this director, with a lot of these kids. She's not going to have with me, you know.
I'm sorry.
No,
well, before MGM, my understanding, you have our gang, you're in our gang, and then Hal Roach. Paramount wanted to make Skippy. It was Paramount, not MGM, right? That wanted to make Skippy, and they said they I guess had been impressed with you in our gang. And my understanding is that Paramount paid Roach $25,000 to get you, but you were at the same $50 a week salary.
Yeah,
they got a steal there.
You said something that made me want to say something. No, my Norman Torog was being thought of as a growing, this nice fat Jewish boy, of being a good director.
Yeah.
And so Paramount had hired him to make Skippy, to direct Skippy, before they started production. This was, but it was the first guy, and then because then they wanted to hire a guy, somebody and people on the set that was going to get along with him, or he was going to get along with them, you know, cameramen and so on and so forth. And that's how that worked.
And as you mentioned, this was probably the first movie adapted from a comic strip. Now it seems like there's not any movies that aren't from comics, is it?
Yeah, right.
But anyway, maybe you can just talk about, I don't know, did you read Skippy as a kid? What was Skippy like as a comic strip?
I didn't read comic strips as a kid, no.
So,
Not like most kids. Teachers had a problem getting me to read anything, you know.
when you played Skippy, one of the things that a lot of people observed is how much the costumes were able to, how much you were made to look like the character in the strip.
Yeah.
What were some of the, maybe you can describe the outfit that Skippy wears throughout the film?
Well, I haven't got one around in front of me anyway, no. They didn't want to make it too ridiculous, but it was like a little nicer coat with shoulder pads that you didn't see in the newspaper or on kids regularly,
Right.
you know. But near to a distance stuff that Skippy was in, because there were never close-ups like this
Right.
in the newspaper of Skippy. And the tie was never really a good bow tie because nobody wanted to bother with him, and he didn't know how to do it either, you know. So that was always a mess hanging down all the time. And short pants, because that's what the kids wore at that age.
And,
They didn't spend the money on long pants.
and he had his little hat, right?
And the hat, right?
The checkered hat or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Now, the most famous, and I'm sure it's probably a somewhat painful story for you, was during that movie, they had to make you cry.
Yeah,
Now, this is your uncle, that's the director.
yeah.
That didn't stop him from being a little sadistic, did it?
Oh, no, that was... The one experience I'm about to tell you is what had me convinced, and the co-author I had for the book that we did, and Please Don't Shoot My Dog, that was, I did with this guy. And we wrote together. And I'd never written I've written letters, but I'd never written a book. And but I was in my late 40s then when we did that book, I think, and almost 50 when it was published. Yeah, and I don't know. The costumes didn't bother me. It was just you had to change clothes, and that was boring to me as a kid.
Right.
You know, when we got there. But my mother took care of that. You know. So.
But as far as that incident with your uncle, there's a lot of misinformation that's out there. What actually transpired there? I think it's a crazy story.
It's exactly what we wrote in the book because I remember it so well. I'm now telling you what I didn't know at the time. There was a scene where we were supposed to pick up the dog who had been found at the dog store. What do you call them?
The kennel, the pound.
Yeah. And the man said nobody wanted the dog, so it was destroyed. And in the picture, you know, he and I look at each other and walk out of the place, and we're walking down the street and starting to cry and crying. And I'm trying to talk the kid, Suki, out of crying, but I'm crying so hard, so on and so forth. So we rehearsed the outdoors where Norm, the director, wanted the crying really coming out there because it'd just be the two kids kind of half there. Tears didn't have to fall yet because Skippy took Suki and they walked out the door. But outside of that little brown building that was not much taller than you or me, as we came out the door and shut it, I was starting to cry, and that made him cry, the kid. But what got me going was Torog convinced me that the dog got sick with this and that, and to keep from suffering with this pain and so forth, they had to shoot the dog. And I couldn't believe it. And he said, well, that's what it is. And I said, when did you do that? He said, no, we haven't done it yet. And I said, oh, good. No, we're going to do it. We're just waiting now. The prop man didn't have any live bullets, and we didn't have a policeman here. So he had to go to the police department and get one of the policemen to come with the bullets and his gun and everything. And I, no, yes. Well, they're on their way. And so he got everything ready. The camera on the dollies, you know, for us to go and do the dialogue and everything. And the next thing that we did after it was all well rehearsed for the cameraman and director and everybody without crying was he'd say, all right, we're going to shoot and this better work now. And so the whole set, all the crew knew what was going to happen. So Torog yelled out, quiet everybody, quiet please. And hey Charlie, you in the back there with your gun, yeah, shoot the dog now, will you please, and get it over with. And I started to say, Uncle Norman, he said, just shut up. You got to do your scene, that's what you worry about, not the fucking dog. I think he said fucking dog. And it made me cry. And then I realized, oh, you got to keep crying in the scene, because the scene, the dolly went along there, the scene was, geez, it must have been 2 minutes of talking and crying before we walked past the cameras and out of the shot. And, but it worked.
Did he tell you after the fact that the dog was okay? Like, what happened when he said cut?
He said he was sorry. I didn't like him anymore that day at all. But the next day, then when he looked at the film and he got the front office, I forget who they were at Paramount.
Zukor, maybe.
You know, to look at it and everything. Oh, Jesus, wonderful, wonderful. Okay. So then he was able to tell me.
And what did you say when he told you the dog was okay?
I think I said thank you to be polite, but I was pissed off because it made me cry so hard, you know,
Okay.
I feel so bad. Shooting a gun with a little fuzzy dog, you know.
Well, I think it's been misreported that the dog was actually your dog. It wasn't, it was the dog that was in the movie, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't your, but still, that doesn't make it a lot better.
No, it was we called him in those days, it was a dog man,
Yeah,
not an actor.
yeah,
A dog man is a guy who brings that kind of dog you want, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And given enough time, he trains it for whatever the dog is expected to do a little of.
yeah. Wow. Well, I mean, it just seems to me that that's a pretty awful thing for any director, but especially your uncle, to have done. Could you ever forgive him after that? Were you able to remain friends?
Oh yeah, because the dog was alive and all of that.
So
stuff.
you forgave him.
Yeah, my mother had to talk me into it. I
bet.
wanted to stay angry, you know.
Now, what's pretty amazing when you think about it now, especially with the benefit of 79 years of hindsight, is that nobody has ever matched your feat of getting nominated for an Oscar at 9 years old, 8 years, I don't know if you were 8 or 9 when it happened, but that's unbelievable. For Best Actor,
We were at the hotel
Yeah.
at a table full of people, and you probably heard the story. I was a nominee, and Lionel Barrymore. We were the male nominees for the year, and there was no kids or girls available in those days, little girls or little boys. And when Barrymore was given the award, I wanted to start crying, but I didn't. I felt so bad, you know, because I was, by then, it was after Skippy, and you know, those things happened a year later. Mm-hmm. I was probably 10 or 11, and Barrymore, Lionel, came by with the thing, by our table, and I was crying. He said, "Oh, Jack, don't cry, don't feel bad." He said, he said, you really deserve this. He said, but they gave it to me because they think I'm going to die. And he walked away. My mother didn't think it was very funny, and I didn't either. I started to cry again because he's going to die.
He's gonna. Do you remember anything else about, like where you were when you heard that you had even been nominated? Because I'm sure, I know it was the early days of the Oscars, but it was still a big deal.
No, because no kids were ever nominated, and not having known any kid that might have been, or I didn't know anybody who won an award, it didn't mean a lot to me.
Right.
I
think it's amazing that even, like I was saying, 79 years later, the closest that anyone has ever come to the closest anyone's come to your record is Mickey Rooney was 19 when he got nominated. That's not even close.
Yeah.
So I think your record might last forever. That's a hard one to beat, because who casts who casts young kids in lead roles anymore in serious movies?
Yeah, it's true. And well, the star on Hollywood Boulevard thing, and that guy, what's his name?
Sid Grauman.
Huh?
Sid Grauman.
Is that his name?
The one. Well,
the guy who he started it and he still does it. He God, what's his name?
Are you talking about the handprints or
no? That's in front of the theater.
Yeah.
No, the the Hollywood star. There's a name for the whole thing.
The Walk of Fame.
Walk of Fame.
Yeah.
And I don't remember. My mother doesn't either. The guy never called and said, "We're having this made. We're going to put it in. We want Jack to take a picture with it, and so on and so forth." And my mother said, "Yeah, okay." And then the studio called and said, they said you didn't sound like you were very entertained about this, and Mrs. Cooper. And she said, "Oh, it would be fine. So they gave us a date, a studio car to pick us up, take us there to Vine Street and Sunset and Vine, and it's supposed to still be there. I haven't walked in there to look at it on the ground."
And so you didn't realize that was quite a big deal either, right?
No.
Well,
it was then. What I don't realize is, in the last couple of years, I have read, during maybe the last 3 or 4 years, I have read 6 or 7 times article about him, and a new person. They're doing another one on Vine Street, on Hollywood Boulevard, on Sunset Boulevard, and all the old names that they brought up in these 6 or 7 times I've read about it in the last few years, they never brought mine up. Never did.
Well, I think what is cool though, also, along those same lines, when you had your handprints and footprints and your signature at Grauman's, do you remember that?
Oh yes, very much. And they were extremely nice and made me feel so good. And I remember the man that was helping me do it all, it was somebody, not a cement man, but it had to do with hiring these guys and everything, and worked for Mr. Grauman. And he just made me feel so good. And he said, "Jack, boy, you're doing great. You deserve this. You really do. And we're so proud of you and proud to be able to do this for you and with you," and so forth.
And I know Sid Grauman afterwards, maybe without your knowledge, wrote in "America's Boy," right?
Yeah.
Which I think you're the only person there that has a nickname written on their cement.
Yeah.
But I was looking at a picture of it today from the time. It's on the internet, and they were saying that day, 2,000 school children were at the theater watching you do it because they were on their way in to see the champ.
Oh my God.
So it must have been
I forgot the kids, yeah.
They all probably remember that day too. But
wow.
I have to ask one, I guess the obvious question is, how does from a very early age you came across as very natural and intelligent and mature when you were acting, which is with a lot of child stars of any age, you don't see that. How do you explain the sort of inherent intelligence and everything that came across. You were almost like a little man in this child's body.
Well, I guess because my mother talked to me not like I was a little kid, but once in a while she had to say, "Do you understand what I'm saying?" And I'd say, "Well, do you mean so and so?" She said, "No, darling. When I ever say this, I really mean that, and you have to understand that from a grown-up lady. And a grown-up lady isn't always talking the same way a grown-up man is." "Okay, Mom." We were such friends, you know, that she made it easy for me to understand dialogue that I was going to have to do, you know.
Did you ever feel like, you know, a lot of child actors today, you read about their, or former child actors, you read about the fact that they were actually being pressured to do it. They had to support their families.
Yeah.
They had the stereotypical stage mother or whatever, or the father that was driving them to do something against their own will. Did you ever feel like were you always a willing participant in doing this, or was it ever?
Oh, no problem. First of all, my mother had the feeling, even before there was all that talk and knowledge being discovered in a year or so later, of Coogan's father, the drunk, pissing away the money, the kids' money, and which made him grow up, and he became quite a drunk, and that's how he died, driving his car home one day down in Palm Springs. I was driving this way back to our house in Palm Springs, and I saw his car that way, going the other way, and he knew me. We'd seen each other a few times down there, so I waved out my window, and he was a couple of 100 yards away of a street that went that way. I was going this way, and I waved, and he waved back. And I don't know, a few feet later, I guess, I didn't see it, I was on the way home, he was in an accident and killed. And
so there was an example of a child star who did not have a nice experience.
No.
And you worked with his brother on Skippy and Sookie, right?
Yeah.
So, and did he seem like a happy kid, Robert? Or was it Robert? Yeah.
Bobby Coogan, yeah. Not especially, no. Not especially. Also, of all the, I mean, you have to look back at my mother, young as she was, because she was supporting a family for a long time, till I was able to do more of it than her. The growing up she did so quickly is, I don't remember the why and who she hired as a business manager and this kind of stuff, but I got to know him real well, and I think it's only with the business. We have a business manager now. Listen to me. My wife is dead, and nobody in these pictures is alive in here. I'll show you after a while. And what was I going to say?
Well, you were talking about the business manager.
Business manager, yeah. That I think this is only the fifth one in my 70-some years, because these, the business manager was some guy in his 30s in those days, or 35, and we were with him, and he got older and older, and sometimes retired or whatever, and my mother got another one. But no business manager ever cheating. Every business manager teaching my mother, don't do this, don't buy that, stocks, be careful, and once in a while he'd say, let's pay X dollars for this man who will, for 6 months, we will trust him with, $10,000. My mother said, what? She said, yeah, that's all. And that stock a year later would turn out to be 200,000. You know,
So you had good advisors, good people around you.
only the best, and the business manager. Instead of trying to fool the business manager, and my mother died. You know, as I said, I was 19, going on 20 when she died.
And was your grandmother dead already?
Oh yeah.
So you were on your own at 19?
Yeah. Yeah, I lived on Sunset Boulevard and in Sunset Towers.
At 19, totally on your own. Wow.
Yeah. The business manager, because Norman, he was too busy, he couldn't be a father. Her sisters, they saw they were annoying coming around to my apartment. What am I doing? Am I all right? And so they would, on the pretense of having a little dinner party for so-and-so, she'd invite me over, and the younger one and then the older one. It was okay. But it was a little lonely, and it was, you wanted it, you were dared to get in some trouble, but then I had the brain then to go to my business manager, and privately, he'd say, sure, privately, sit down. I'd say, I'm thinking about doing this and that, and some girls and that, and I said, I know it's going to get me in some kind of trouble. If the mother of one of these girls finds out or something, he said, of course, you don't want to turn out to be, you know, God knows. So, it was always so, what can I say to you? I read more and more, the older I get, about these former kid actors. The black one recently on
Gary Coleman,
Coleman,
and then Michael Jackson,
Yeah.
and Lindsay Lohan. It seems like every one of them runs into trouble. I was going to ask you, why do you think that is? What is it about being a child actor that sets you up for a difficult adulthood?
Sets you up for what?
For difficulties in adulthood. You know, inability to grow up and be a normal person.
Oh, well, not me.
No, but with
But those people,
Why?
well, because they used him, the child. They never thought that. Evidently, the parents never thought about running into this kind of money. When I say this kind of money, $500 a week or $800 a week. Jesus Christ, 30, 40, 50 years ago, that's a lot of money. And
now we're talking millions.
yeah, and the parents, I guess they couldn't stand not pissing it away and having a good time, you know, or at least it was either the father or the mother turned out to be so bad with it and wouldn't keep the business manager, you know.
And more than financial issues, so many of them have drug issues, alcohol issues.
Yeah.
It's interesting. But the popularity of Skippy, when you were now returned from the loan, from when Paramount returned you back to Hal Roach, he saw that, I guess that's when Louis B. Mayer came looking, right?
Yeah,
And
he saw the movie.
And do you remember, so now Mayer, I guess, buys your contract from Roach and brings you into the studio. Do you remember the first time you met Mayer and the first time you saw that studio? Your first impressions of them?
No, my mother drove up to the gate, and the gate had been formed that where to tell us to park because we're guests of Mr. Mayer. And it was right near the gate inside the studio in Culver City. And I can see it now and I remember it. But it wasn't, to me at that age, you know, it wasn't thrilling. And to meet him.
To meet him, he had this big office, right?
Yeah.
So you went in there, and what did he apparently he liked to be almost like, he liked to be almost like a father figure, right? He wanted to be considered like a dad.
Well, he wanted to be liked, mainly. Because evidently there was no kid in his life that loved him, you know, and if you knew him in those days, you could see why. And after we were under contract there, after the champ, we made the champ first there, and got a lot of publicity and everything else. And he was worried I was going to turn out to be like Coogan as a kid, and no, my mother's liable to be like Coogan's father, and he got a lawyer. And my mother said, "We have a business manager." He said, "I'm getting a lawyer. This is an MGM case." He said, "It's not just for you." He said, "It's for us, and if it's good for Jack, it's good for MGM." And he started talking rough to my mother, and I don't know, and I said something about, he wanted me there, and my mother kept wanting to send me out of the room, but he said, no, you didn't leave him here. Because I guess he felt that made my mother go careful. And with his talking to her as he did, finally she broke into tears. I don't know what the subject was about, but it bothered her. And he said, "All right, that's enough." And it was a case of not money, because I was before I went in there, and it was $1,000 a week. He had to pay Roach.
Yeah, you had a set contract.
Yeah.
So it was just another dispute. Was this at that very first meeting, or was this at a later meeting?
No, later meeting.
Yeah.
After the champ.
Oh, after the champ. Okay.
The minute he had a deal, he was putting the champ together before he even had the deal fully made.
To bring you over.
Right. But once he could bring me over legally, then boom, we started the picture within a couple of weeks. And I got the feeling that my mother started with the tears and this and that, and his saying, "Oh, for Christ's sake, Mabel, don't, blah, blah." And at that point, he would say, "For Christ's sake," and so forth, forgetting me entirely with her. And she'd say, can we leave? And he'd say, yeah, go on. And he got up and walked to the door, and he opened the door, and my mother said, "Thank you, and I'll talk to you when we both are in a different mood." And boom, some more of it started to come out of her, and because she didn't want to fuck up the money either, you know. And he started to say something to her, and I got a hold of his arm like that. And I said, "Don't upset her anymore, please, Mr. Mayor." And he said, "Get your goddamn hands off of me, kid, and don't ever do so-and-so and so-and-so." And he grabbed me, whatever I had on here, he grabbed it like this. And he said, "Don't ever cry in my office, and don't ever let your mother cry in my office, and act like a young man, because I don't deserve this treatment, and you certainly we don't deserve to put up with this crap. Now get the hell out of here."
Wow.
So my mother and me started to walk down the hall, and I felt, Mother, she said, "Jack, please, let's get home and calm down, and then we'll talk about it." And we did that night. We took Jesus, clear up to like 9:30, 10 o'clock.
Talking
my age, we were talking about it.
What did you say? What was the discussion?
It was business, and it was hard. It was kind of business that ordinarily, as she was explaining it, that a lawyer would have gone in for, or a husband who was a man would have gone in. But we didn't have the lawyer then, and we weren't allowed that anyway. And the business manager, unlike my business manager today, was not also a lawyer. And it was a business manager. And so we got over it.
Mm-hmm.
But the way he had treated me, I never forgot. Because I couldn't kick him in the crotch or something,
Right.
you know.
Right.
It was really.
Did he ever apologize, or did you just never talk about it again?
Never, I don't remember talking ever to him again anyway.
Wow. And yet, because you were such an important asset for the studio, they seemed to make a big deal. Like, for instance, within that same first year that you were there, 1931, you know, there was a short that was recorded, which is sometimes on TV now. I think it's called Jackie. Sorry, just a second. I think it was Jackie Cooper's birthday party or something where
Oh yeah, he had a party. Yeah.
But was that?
Yeah, he did. He had in the studio a big U-shaped table that was, I don't know, 60, 70 people at it, you know.
Yeah.
And food and everything, and a birthday cake the size of this, you know.
And and MGM, which at the time had more stars than the heavens,
Yeah.
quote unquote, weren't those stars?
Most of them are at the table.
And weren't they the waiters? I read if you look at this short, it
Oh.
shows Clark Gable serving you guys.
Yeah.
Now I don't know if that was just for the
I don't
movie.
remember.
But so I mean, were those other actors there? Were they?
There were a lot of them there. I remember that. Yeah.
But were in general, were the other actors at MGM that were adults? Were they kind to you? Were they nice when you would walk around?
Yeah. Normal people are with a kid, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah, they were all of them.
Do you remember any of them in particular impressing you or being, particularly friendly?
Not too many years ago.
Yeah, because I'm thinking the names of people that were there, Gable and all these different people. It's pretty unbelievable. And there were MGM also produced a few other great child stars, right? I mean, I'm thinking about at the
Judy Garland and yeah.
But at the time that you were there, my understanding is that there were the top three were yourself, Freddie Bartholomew, and Mickey Rooney.
Yeah.
Did you guys get to know each other a little bit?
I don't know what it was. Influence from the mothers of Rooney and our fathers, Rooney and Bartholomew, because we were never invited to lunch or their house or to dinner or anything. And a couple times my mother, in the beginning, invited them to come over to lunch. You know, no, we're busy and whatever. So she realized she didn't want those mothers didn't want their kids to be impressed with how I was being raised, and the house and everything else. I was getting more money than those kids in those days.
And I think the three of you made a movie together, didn't you? There was what was the
Boy of the Streets.
Is that what it was?
I think that's the name. Boy of the Streets. Streets of New York.
Well, I know also The Devil is a Sissy, right? That was in 1936.
Yeah.
That was a little later, but
Yeah.
but anyway, maybe you can. This is a question that I've always been interested to ask you. When you were at MGM, what would an average day entail for you from when you wake up till when you go to bed? You wake up at what time? What does a day involve for you there, as a young actor there?
Well, I woke up the hours I always woke up in those days, 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and don't bother anybody because they don't want to be bothered. And then my mother would throw a robe on and come in the kitchen and do some cereal and milk and stuff. And if the paper was at the door, she'd bring it in and put the funny paper down for me, or something. I had a tutor rather than my mother, the lawyer, business manager and everything, and even Torah said, I go into school, kids are going to be jealous, they're going to make it on me, some of them are going to want to beat me up, some of them are going to say things that make me unhappy, And my mother agreed to that, of course, and so she paid something like, for a school teacher, I think it was something like $100 or $110 a week, because the woman had to come 5 days a week, like I was going to school. But once she sat down and she had the papers open and ready, she would look at she had a little clock she used. She would look at the clock, and she said 3 hours, that was going to be it. And wherever we were, in a subject or something, she said it, 3 hours. And I loved it. And I didn't have to get dressed up or go, but just that I had to be on time, and I was. And I knew 3 hours, and that was it.
And then, would the studio send a car or something after that? What would the rest of your day look like?
Oh, no, my mother had a car if we wanted to go someplace or something, but
But you wouldn't you have to report to the studio then? Wouldn't that be the next thing?
if we're going out,
No, well, I'm saying just your average day when you were under contract there. So you'd wake up, you'd have your breakfast, you'd have your tutor come over, and then what would happen? Obviously, you have to go to work at some point. So.
no, I think that there would probably, no, there was somebody in the office that Mayor had talked to my mother almost every day. Where are you going? What are you doing? Oh, thank you, Mrs. Cooper, and so on and so forth. And sometimes he'd call back and say, Mr. Mayor says, absolutely, please don't do that. Come in, if you want to talk to him about something, other favor he can do for you, but don't, whatever that was, I don't know. People, somebody wanting to entertain or whatever, or a whorehouse, who knows what it was, I don't know. And, no, just, I finally they got me a nice bicycle, I like that. And, but only ride the sidewalks, don't ride the street. No, sir. And only my block, a big block in Beverly Hills then, by that time.
So, but you wouldn't, so you're saying you wouldn't go into the studio every day?
No.
When you were at the studio, would you have to go to, what were the order of events? You'd have to you'd go through the gates, and now what? You have to go to makeup or all this stuff. What was the order of event? Your commissary, all these different buildings that are on the lot. What was your day like when you were working?
Oh, if we're shooting something, well, yeah, the first thing was to get the wardrobe, and then knock the very last of it around the corner, neck or anything, then go into makeup, and then down on the set, the wardrobe man and the makeup man would finish it,
One thing, a lot was written about you, obviously, at the time, and I hope I can read you a paragraph from one piece and then get your reaction, because I think it's kind of neat. This is by Jimmy Fiddler, and I guess he was a gossip columnist or something, but he wrote...
Sounds like it, yeah.
Yeah, I think he wrote, quote, "The longer I know Jackie Cooper, the more he amazes me. 8 years ago, with all America showering him with flattery, he should have been a spoiled brat. Today, having successfully weathered the awkward age and risen again to stardom, he should be a precocious, insufferably cocky pain in the neck. But he wasn't, and he isn't. Jackie, I honestly believe, is the most normal youngster I've ever known," unquote. So, how did you manage to keep your feet on the ground and not be a pain in the ass?
I'm telling you, that woman was something. She was something. And to keep her mother, the grandmother, my grandmother, quiet and not interrupting, the grandmother who claimed to be such a Catholic, but she was always too busy to go into church. And she swore like mad, saying Jesus Christ all the time, and God damn it, And my mother had the big enough to do it in front of me. The treatment, and well, as we've spoken about it, was not to treat me like a cute little puppy dog or something, but like somebody that you can convince will want to grow up to be like him or you, or, you know. And my mother was not a pain in that trying to teach all the time. The teaching was to teach me, you know, mathematics and English and this and that, and spelling and writing, and never to get into social conduct, that kind of stuff. That was, my mother agreed. That was, the teacher said, that's your job. My mother said, it certainly is. And that worked that out nicely.
Well, I won't keep you much longer, but if I can ask you a little bit more.
Yeah, please.
When somebody looks at your time at MGM, the obvious thing that stands out is the fact that they paired you up, I think on 4 different occasions, with Wallace Beery.
Yeah.
And so the first question about that I have is, do you remember the first time that you were introduced to Wallace Beery?
I don't remember being introduced to him the first time, no. I remember being told who he was and this and that. And my mother got somebody to run part of a movie he was making, so I could look at him and see he's a good actor and this and that. But starting with the Champ, I think I told you over the phone, maybe not. There was a scene that, what's his name, Victor Young, the director, I forget his name.
King Vidor.
King Vidor. There's King in there someplace.
Yeah.
And had him pull me over and sit me on his lap. And he finished this scene with me. And I stopped crying because he's talking with me and pleasing me and making some sense, making me smile. And by the end of the scene, he had something with like, that's the way it is, guy. You know, that's something nice. So the minute Vito said, cut, he said, thank you to Vito, and he said, get the fuck off of me. Just that, with those words. And he pushed me off. And I never forgot, to this day, I've never forgotten that.
That's awful.
Yeah. Well, he was bored. He didn't really want to feel he was going to get in a movie here where the kid was going to steal a lot of the scenes. You know?
Which, we watched it yesterday to prepare, to refresh for this, and there's no question. I mean, it's ridiculous that he won the Best Actor Oscar. You were the star of the movie. I mean,
No, he didn't win it. Not for that movie.
No?
No.
I think
Lionel Barrymore won it for that movie.
For which movie? For
Treasure Island, I'm sorry.
No, but I'm talking. That happened on. I'm talking about the Champ.
Yeah, I forget who did.
Yeah,
Beery get it?
Beery he was a co-winner. That was the only time you've ever had a Best Actor tie, even though he had 1 vote less than Frederick March for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That was considered a tie if it was within 1 vote, so they both got the Oscar. But I think it's crazy because, well, I mean, you were terrific in Skippy, and you certainly deserve the nomination for that, but I think you were even better, probably, in the Champ.
Oh, yeah, I love that director.
Vidor.
Really did, yeah, Vidor.
He's remembered as one of the great directors of that period, and one of the things that he's famous for is the sort of sweeping shots, the moving camera, and there's a lot of that in the Champ.
The Champ, yeah.
At the time, it was reported when these things were being made and when the studio could control their own publicity, they were putting out stories that ostensibly had quotes from you, where they were reporting that you and Beery were buddies, that you would call him Uncle Wally, that you would follow him around, and that you guys were pals.
That's a studio publicity man trying to sell the movies.
So that was not at all an accurate reflection.
Well, absolutely no. He couldn't stand it. He was bored to death with me. And I was, as a kid, year after year, angry that I had to be around him, you know, because he made me feel so terrible.
Yeah. Now, did your mother, or was anybody on set who witnessed his behavior? Did anybody say anything?
I don't know if she's talked to him or if she never told me. You know?
Yeah. And yet, despite this personal lack of warmth between you guys, you did some of your best. You both did some of your best work together. How do you explain the fact that despite that, you managed to bring out such good performances from each other?
Director, the King Peter, and what was another director?
Well, Victor Fleming did Treasure Island, I guess, with you
Fleming,
too.
I think it was, yeah.
And then
They learned a lot from, each director learned a lot from the previous director, personally and looking at his movie.
yeah.
They told me that Fleming, somebody ran the Champ, the next director, one of them, you just mentioned.
Well, there was the Champ, and then there was the Bowery, and then Treasure Island, and then O'Shaughnessy's Boy.
Yeah.
You said, quote, "I never did actually hate him, although I never liked him. I really don't think he was a swell guy at all. When I first started with him, I wanted him to be. He was a big disappointment." Is that fair?
Yeah.
So it's unbelievable, because it's not like you guys just met briefly. You worked from 1931 through 1935.
Yeah.
Another thing that you've said that I think is very interesting is that over the course of your travels, over your lifetime, people who meet you often say, "Oh, I loved you in your movies with Wallace Beery," and they were, "What was he like?" And you've decided to handle that a certain way, right?
Politely. That's all.
But I gather that you would what you said here is, it would be nice to tell some lovely stories about Beery giving me little presents and things, but he didn't, and he wasn't this way. It's a terrible shame, but I never mention it in interviews, in magazines and things, because the people don't want to hear it. Cab drivers every day in New York City will say, "Oh, I remember you with Wallace Beery," and I don't disappoint them. I say he was a wonderful guy and a good actor, because I don't think Beery was ever intentionally mean to anybody. I think he had a kind of sickness. I don't know what it was. I was much too young to try to analyze it at the time. Wally, for some reason, was not going to let anybody hurt his feelings and kept to himself, and therefore died a very lonely old man.
I guess, a lot of the time he was probably hungover, but not to a point that he couldn't walk across the room without falling down or something. But, maybe he knew he had to go to work, so he didn't have a drink for 2 days,
Yeah.
and that put him in a lousy mood.
Yeah.
But his brain was functioning.
And he would take it out on you, unfortunately.
Yeah, right.
I know, and then I remember on Treasure Island where he has his leg taped behind him the whole time. That can't have helped his mood. That must not have helped the thing.
No.
But the thing about the Champ that I think really charms people the most, and maybe this is just a theory, but it's the fact that here you are, as the kid, basically being the adult, looking out for him who's supposed to be the adult, but who's like a kid. Was that at all? I should just. Any thoughts on that? I mean, is that what you? How do you explain the appeal of that movie? Which is.
I remember as a kid, once in a while, my mother would hear a story from me about what was going on in the day's work, or she'd ask if she heard this and that and so on, and she didn't want to impress me with a lot of anti-Beery stuff, but she said some people like kids and some people don't have any kids, so they don't want kids around. They don't have dogs and cats, they don't have kids, They don't want a convertible car either, And so there again, I think that my mother just was so damn careful.
Well, she was warning you about the Wallace Beery. I mean, the W.C. Fields school of thought. The guys that don't want kids and don't want animals, right?
Right.
We were both yesterday when we watched the Champ. I held my breath a lot when you went to visit your mother's apartment in that movie, and you're climbing around on the roof. How did you? That was pretty convincing. I can't imagine they actually let you go up on a roof. Do you remember that scene where you're running? You're like. You wave down to your...
Yeah, I barely remember. I remember being on the roof, but I remember not fearing any danger. I think they had something out of the picture,
Yeah.
not in the lens.
Yeah.
Here and there and there and there
To catch you.
around this room
Yeah.
that I could fall into, and it would be a vent,
Yeah. A mattress or something.
some kind of a net.
Yeah.
But and under the net was like a huge mattress,
Yeah.
you know, something like that.
We know how you mustered your tears in Skippy,
Yeah.
but I don't know how you did it in The Champ, both after he sends you to live with your mother and after he dies. Do you remember how you were able to get emotional for those scenes?
Yeah, my mother could sit and talk to me about sad things, about your father, and I'm sorry you never knew him, and he wanted to love you, but here's what happens when you know, treat your body with all that booze and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And she would try to make me feel, God, some marvelous things were going to be in my life, and this prick, you know, ruined them all.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me cry.
Mm-hmm.
But she had a way, I didn't realize it was a way of hers
Yeah.
until many years later,
Yeah.
but she had a way of, in explaining things, telling me things, that how sad the evidences they were, and how bad she felt as well. And she said to me many years later, before she died, that just you know, with the you can't, you gotta, I don't know how to say it. She was just trying to say, I think I said it to you earlier today, she was, without overdoing it in too many nice words, you know, that some people just, they have habits, and some of the habits are just not good for them, but they're good enough for them in that their opinion.
Right. But you never felt emotionally sort of exploited or anything? I mean, this was a tough thing for a child to have to even think about, a lot of these things. Did you feel like it was fair to put you through this stuff?
No, I felt, no, because, I mean, I'd say to my mother, she'd tell me, now, another picture you're going to make is about a book called Treasure Island. I don't think you read it, Jack, and you ought to read it. And I said, Wallace Berry's going to be the guy in it, and she said, oh yeah. And I, right away, you know, I'd say to myself, you know, but it's got to be done, you know. I was feeling, you know, a professional animal in that herd in Culver City of actors and actresses, and I was one of them, and I got to live with this.
The next one that you did with him, the Bowery, wasn't, I guess you and Barry were loaned to 20th Century Fox for that, and it wasn't the hit that they were hoping it would be.
Oh.
And so was there some pressure when you came back a year later and you both had to do Treasure Island, which is obviously a famous story? I mean, was there a lot of pressure to make this one a hit?
I don't remember that. I don't remember. Because whatever director, producer, and Wallace Berry were talking about or meeting about,
You weren't a part
I
of it.
don't know.
You've said that movie, Treasure Island, was the hardest work of my life and some of the most unpleasant. But there were some bright spots, mostly from my association with the director, Victor Fleming, who had done The Wizard of Oz, The Wizard of Oz.
So, yeah.
And Gone with the Wind. No, yeah.
Did he do that? I think
Yeah,
so.
I'm confusing myself now, but I believe it was amazing because here's this guy who did both The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind. And now, a couple of years later, here he was working with you. What made you like him so much?
Okay, evidently the way I was treated.
And also, he was into...
I wasn't treated like a dumb kid,
Yeah.
and I wasn't treated. You know, I was treated what I respected was like an actor he enjoyed, and not just a kid.
And didn't he? I think you were also into aviation, right? That was something that he was big with. But I also read a funny story because I believe this movie. Where was it shot?
Treasure Island,
Yeah.
Catalina Island, and Culver City.
So you guys spent a lot of time though, like 10 weeks or something. Now,
In and out of Catalina, yeah.
and was that? I gathered from what I've read that it was kind of a fun time for you because they had a ship for you to run around and play on, right?
Yeah.
And do you remember the construction of this? How they made the ship because it was on top of a yacht or something, right?
Yeah. No, I don't. No.
What I had read was that they had this old frigate hull right on top of the yacht, which made it neat. But the funny story that I read, and maybe you remember this one, was that you still had to have your schooling. So the teacher was flown out there onto a seaplane. Do you remember what happened with that?
No.
Apparently, she fell into the water while trying to get on the.
And she was about 250 pounds too. Yeah.
And do you remember what Victor Fleming was saying when she went in the water?
No.
Apparently, this is from an article around that time. He was encouraging you, Jackie, throw your school books in the water. Throw your school books in the water because she was. So it sounds like he was a nice guy to.
Yeah.
But you felt miscast, is what I gather. You felt, and this is another quote, they should have gotten an older boy, preferably English, one with more maturity. I didn't realize that I was wrong then, but Fleming knew it. Did you feel that way? You felt like you were, I mean, you did a great job. You felt, though, that you were wrong for the part?
I evidently did. I can't remember that. I don't remember that.
I know one other comment that you made was that color was beginning to be available for movies,
Yeah.
and that it kind of baffled you. Why didn't these guys do this movie, of all movies, in color rather than black and white? It might have been more successful. Was that the thinking? That, you know, that you'd hope... it seems like it was a few years before there was much color, but I don't know.
No, I don't have no memory of that.
Another, just kind of stepping back, when I look at the time period when you were at your high point in terms of a career, when America as a country was sort of at its low point. This was the Great Depression, the years right after the Great Depression.
Yeah.
Were you at all aware, you know, I know it's a very insulated world inside the studio, were you at all aware of what was going on outside at that time? Around the rest of the country?
I remember 1929 reading, you know, and just the front page of a newspaper headlines all referred to 1929.
Yeah.
Stock market. And, my mother, every time she passed by the table and she saw what I was looking at, she would say, "Aren't you lucky?" And I'd say, "We sure are." You know, she was glad that I realized that, you know. But it was, my God, $50,000 a year in 1929, 1930, you know.
That's what you were making?
So, yeah.
When that was massive.
Yeah. We got a raise finally about the third year there. Went to 1,500, you know. Yeah.
1,500 a week?
Yeah.
Wow. So...
Except, did I tell you the story before? My mother, when we were not signed up at Metro, when I was doing anything, including our gang comedies, in the summertime, the shows didn't sell that much with little kids in them, you know. And so my mother, being a pianist, popular music, she knew a lot of people in vaudeville and so forth. And our agent said, your contract says, which it did, the mayor did it with everybody, and so did Roach. There'll be like 20, 22, 24 weeks. You don't have to work, but you won't get paid either. And but the rest of the year you get paid every week, whether you're shooting something or not.
And you weren't allowed to go work for somebody else during those weeks that you weren't working?
There was nothing, for some reason, stupid reason, nothing ever written down like that. So one day my mother said to the business manager, he told me the story years later, why, I'll sit with whatever, what do you call it, kind of, they don't use the word producer, whatever, the man running this vaudeville story. It's got dancers in it, it's got vocalists in it, it's got musicians in it, and you're all together and get on the same train, not plane, same train, and they go to, they set up the 24 weeks, or 22, whatever it was. I think it was 24. And it turns out you're making much more money than you're making at MGM. First, much more than at Roach.
Right.
But even at most, because with the vaudeville, the movies had drawn people in. So 2 years later, my God, what we were drawing in were people who knew who was there, you know.
Yeah.
And also, they wanted to see the vaudeville, the rest of it anyway.
But
my mother was a pianist for me because I sang. She had me singing songs.
So you had your own act, sort of, and the appeal was that you were already an established movie star, but here they could see you in the flesh.
Right, exactly. And Mayor, we got home from the first one that we did, and he said, "Do you realize we didn't pay you, but you made almost twice as much money in those 24 weeks than you would have if you'd have stayed home."
And was he?
He wasn't happy.
He wasn't happy about it.
He said he tried to. He offered 3/4 of that if we'd stay in town, whether we worked or not.
Right.
And the agent got with him privately and said, you'll have a movie, and you know, that's, don't let that summer go away from you, you know,
so
because you're going to pay for it.
So
we only got away with the vaudeville for 1 year.
1 year, and then he paid to keep you around.
Right, and we worked.
Yeah.
Sometimes they didn't have a picture quite ready, but sometimes we stayed in town to finish one, or we were in town and we were getting paid, so we start one, and you know, when there was only about 6 weeks of the summer left.
Right. Every child star, every child actor eventually arrives at that moment where you can no longer pass as a child anymore. You're now, people can see physically, you've obviously literally outgrown being a child actor. When did that arrive for you? When did that begin? That you could no longer, that you could no longer pretend to be just play a child anymore.
I guess, I gotta look at the list of movies.
But if you had to guess an age even, would it be, because
the World War II was growing a lot of us up pretty fast. Cause we started in 41, right? So I was 1922 to 40. No, I was
19.
19, right? Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And 19 and then 20 and this and that. So my mother and my agent and me were scared to death of the draft
Yeah.
or the Army, you know, pulled me in to do what?
Mm-hmm.
And through some connection that that mayor had, LB had with the Navy, help on Treasure Island and this and that. They got me in the Navy, and my mother was afraid that we'll make him a pilot. Jesus Christ, right away he'll get killed and blah 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 blah. So.
And this was right before your mother passed away,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or right around that.
Yeah.
But I read even that, if I can read you another one of your quotes,
Yeah.
you said, they had to start shaving my chin when I was 12 years old because light started to pick it up. I guess you might have had some. And also, they kept me in short pants as long as they could until they were shaving the hair on my legs because it was beginning to photograph. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
What? How did that come about? What was
Photographs? Well, Jesus, they'd be looking at the dailies, and the producer would say, "For Christ's sake, he's supposed to be 11 or 12 years old." They could look at the hair on his legs, you know.
So they'd take it off.
They shaved it off.
I know that eventually, and this is the very last bit here, many people rediscovered you. People who had grown up loving you rediscovered you through Superman. How did that part of Perry White come about? And ironically, another comic strip turned movie,
Yeah.
right?
I'm trying to remember that somebody was involved in making the first one, and
Is that Keenan Wynn?
huh?
Keenan Wynn?
Keenan. Yeah, Keenan was he was a golf buddy and this and that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And what year was it? Because I was early 20s, I think.
This is 1978 was Superman.
The first one?
Yeah.
78, 22, 72, 50. I was 50 years old?
For Superman 1978, yeah.
Oh my God.
Because you were playing the editor.
Yeah, right. Well, somebody was involved who thought it was a good idea. Maybe it was him.
Mm-hmm.
And producer and everybody was happy with they made like a test, you know.
I gathered that Keenan Wynn had a heart attack, right? He was originally going to play the part.
Yeah.
So now they who do we go to? Who do we go to? And you made it a very memorable part. You had a lot of sort of catchphrases, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the most famous one was sort of "Don't call me chief" or something. Call me like you. But and then you had a very before and after that, you very successful time on the other side of the camera, right? Sort of. Dealing with television.
Directing, yeah.
How did you get into that? And I mean, you did very well with it.
Well, enjoying working with some directors as the actor there, it also involved in me and pressured me. God, I wish I was doing that, you know. And I'll find a kid, you know.
Yeah.
And I forget who I can talk into, but I started with the very, very first thing I can't remember, but secondly, it was, God damn it, was something with Keenan, I can't remember.
Well, I know that eventually, as an executive, you helped. I mean, you were a couple of the things that I learned that you had been involved with Bewitched.
Yeah.
And then casting Sally Field. Is that true?
Yeah.
How did you find her?
Sally was her age and somewhere. She did a bit in some little movie. I forget what it was, and they showed it to me, and I said, "Oh, Jesus, get the kid up here." And I had her in the office and talked to her. And she made a lot of sense and had good ambition. And okay, so we put her in that, and that started her off. Boy, it really did, yeah.
Okay, the last three questions are just like one sentence, kind of very brief things, but I'm curious.
Sure.
This is just sort of your philosophy. If one of your children had said to you that he or she wanted to be an actor as a child, what would you have told them?
If I felt they had something in them that could be, they wouldn't be wasting their time, you know, breaking their own hearts. I'd be all the help I could be, and with you know, bits and pieces to play here and there where directors could treat her well and this and that, or I would be directing something I could treat her well too. Or him. But it's harder on the guy because the schooling and the tutors, and if you're doing good, somehow they don't get you a tutor, they send you to the school in the studio, and those kids are all jealous because you're doing so good, you know. I never had to go through that.
You never went to that little red schoolhouse or whatever on the lot?
No. I'm very lucky.
If you, well, is it true, one thing, your first son, is it true that there was a time when MGM wanted to put him under contract? Or was that not true? One thing that was reported was that you had to tell your wife at the time that it's no way for a kid to grow up, you know, to tell him to pass on an offer to be an actor. That may be BS. Sometimes these things are written down here.
Yeah, no memory.
No memory, okay. If you had not been an actor, what do you think you would have ended up doing with your life?
Well, as much as I love music, I felt that the director is what I was going to really grow up to be and enter in and save enough money that I could retire too.
Yeah. When you stumble upon one of your movies today, whether it's on television or a screening or whatever, what goes through your mind when you happen upon one of them?
When I what?
When you happen to see one of your movies today, what do you think? What goes through your mind?
Well, who is the director? Who is that girl? You know, trying to remember. And some of those things bring back the happier memories. Nicer kids, you know. I was just looking at that picture there. Freddie Bartholomew, we all were under contract to MGM there. I think I wasn't at that point.
So who's everybody? That's Freddie Bartholomew?
Okay, Bartholomew on the left. Next to Bartholomew, I can't remember her name, but she was under contract also. But just bits and pictures.
Yeah.
Rooney, Deanna Durbin, another studio. Judy Garland, MGM. She was 15. That was her birthday, actually. And I was not 15 yet. She was 15 in like, I think in May or June. My birthday's September, you know. And the one person I don't know anybody that ever liked, grown up or kids or what, Deanna Durbin.
She didn't like anybody?
They didn't like her.
They didn't like her. The other kids, you mean, didn't like her?
No, they thought she was a bore. But the grown-ups didn't like her either. There was something she held, I don't know what it was.
And you know, she's gone into a sort of seclusion for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard from her?
No, I haven't heard about her or, oh God, I don't know how many years.
And if you look at what happened to each person, it's kind of interesting because Judy obviously had a sort of a sad ending.
Yes.
Deanna's gone off on her own.
Yeah.
Mickey's still doing his thing. The The other girl, I'd love to find out who that is.
I can't think of her name.
It's
Damn.
not Marcia May Jones, is it? That's
No,
not her, no?
no.
She was your sister in the Champ, right?
In the Champ, I think, yeah.
And then Freddie Bartholomew died young too, didn't he?
Yeah, very sad. Kids didn't like him, grown-ups didn't like him.
Wow.
Directors didn't want to use him.
Was he a pain in the ass? Is that what he was?
I don't know.
Yeah.
He's a quiet kid,
Yeah.
didn't want to make any trouble.
Yeah.
And in the movie Rooney and I did with him, he was no trouble.
Yeah.
He was boring, but he was no trouble.
Well, my very last question is this.
Yeah.
I know that you wrote about this in your autobiography, but I think it's a very interesting story, and it's probably one of the defining moments of your life. What happened one day several years ago when you were driving through the state of Oklahoma and there was a thunderstorm and something unbelievable? I mean, it's just a...
My father,
Yeah.
it was, I think as I wrote it, the car in those days, the Jaguar, didn't have roll-up windows. It had these plastic and canvas around it with, I don't know, some kind of wire in it, and a couple of rods up here and another one down here, and you could put those in the door. So if you shut the door, then no rain was coming in. And there was nothing you could do about, if you're driving along down the highway and it's raining all of a sudden, you can't roll up any windows, and what are you going to do, pull over and get wet? You got the first gas station or whatever it is you can find. You go in there and see if the guy can help you put the goddamn things in and stay in it,
Right.
what he knows about the weather.
Right.
And the guy was helping me fix it, make these things work. And he said, I got to tell you something. I've known you now for almost an hour. He said, your father lives with me.
He knew that you were Jackie Cooper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't want to hear it. And he's telling me about my father still drinking, an old man, unhappy all his life, and nobody could stop him from drinking. He said he's got a nice spot in him, and I like him, and I felt bad for him. He was sleeping on park benches when I met him, he said. I've had him in my house for years. And he said, don't you want to see him? I said, no. After all these years, absolutely no. Not from what I've heard about him and pictures of seeing him and this and that, no. And I hope, I'm sure you're not anxious to go home and tell him you saw me and I did not want to see you. I said, I know you'd like to tell him you saw me, but he's going to say, well, why didn't you bring him home? So, I was quite exhausted. And he said, okay. And I never knew if he got a hold of my father about it or not. I mean, talked to him about it or not, because he lived in the house.
But you didn't have any desire to see him
None.
after all those...
I never saw him, so why should I get myself involved in this, you know?
Right.
Because I was, again, here I was living in New York. I really liked living in California, but New York was real good to me, and I could always go out to get to California if there was a job, you know, in a movie or something. But there was always, quietly, anything I wanted in the summer theater. I could get $1,000, $1,200 a week in, you know, little summer theaters in Connecticut and New York and Massachusetts, you know, in summertime. And then one every other year there'd be a play. And if it was a small part, turned out that the next play they found for me, there was a bigger starring part, you know. And that, of course, if that worked out, then that made Hollywood send for me, you know. So when I came back out here, my first wife was born and raised in New York, so she was tickled to death we're going to live in California. And we got married and brought her out here. And then, I don't know, it just, I was, that one and the next one, you get married too young, you know. But I didn't want to be alone, I guess, and the only woman I really had a lot of patience with and so forth was my mother, because she was so young. She wasn't a cranky old lady, you know. And
well, I think she would probably be very proud of what you ended up doing.
yeah, it was a, I don't know, finally landing out here the last time with this wife. God.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just pointing to the bedroom. She's been dead a year. Look at me. A year last January. And she was happy to move out here and stay here. She loved it.
Well, you got a beautiful place here. It's
Yeah.
great.
Lucky. We first we leased this, and then after a year, when prices started down, the business manager said, "Let's buy it, Jack, and it's not going to hurt anything. It's the worst that'll happen if you want to move. You'll get a little bit more than because of the furniture you got and stuff we put in here, you know." And that okay,
Well, that's great.
and I like it.
It's terrific.
But this, I don't want to move. I've never been in an apartment, well, just for a very short time in my life at Sunset Towers.
Yeah.
And that's it. The other reason I got married so fast. Except I couldn't stand living alone.
Yeah.
And I don't want to ask some guy to move in with me. You know? And there were these girls I went out with, and one I knew through her brother, June Horn, and the father was a director, James Horn, Senior. And June was a lovely girl. And we had this boy who's 53 in 10 minutes.
And he's coming to see you Tuesday, right? You were saying.
No, the older one is.
Oh, okay.
Wait a minute. Yeah, he is. Tuesday, yes.
That's great.
The older one. The younger one was just here a month ago.
That's great.